In 1948, a man was found dead on an Australian beach with no name, no identity, and a secret code that has never been solved. On the 1st of December, 1948, an unidentified man is found dead on Somerton Park Beach, a quiet stretch of coastline near Adelaide, South Australia, propped against a stone sea wall as though he had simply sat down to rest and never gone back up. He is dressed impeccably in a well-tailored suit, a tie, and freshly polished shoes, an unusual choice of clothing for a public beach on a warm summer evening. And there is no wallet, no identification papers, and no obvious sign of violence anywhere on his body. A half-smoked cigarette rests oddly on his collar, as if it had simply slipped from his lips the moment life left him, undisturbed by the tide or the wind coming off the water. Witnesses walking along the esplanade the evening before recall seeing him lying in that exact same spot, one leg extended and the other bent, and simply assumed he was a drunk sleeping off a long night rather than a dying stranger with only hours left. By the time police are called the following morning, rigor mortis has already set in, and there is nothing anyone can do but begin the grim process of trying to work out who he actually is. When investigators finally examine the body closely back of the morgue, they discover that every single label has been carefully cut out of his clothing, snipped away with obvious precision from his jacket, his trousers, even his undershirt, as though someone had deliberately erased any trace of where the garments had come from. His fingerprints are taken and circulated, yet they do not match any record on file. Not in Australia, not in Britain, not in the United States, nor apparently anywhere else in the world that authorities are able to check. An autopsy is performed within days, and the examining doctor becomes increasingly convinced that the man was poisoned, noting damage to internal organs consistent with a powerful toxin. Yet frustratingly, no actual poison can be identified in his system through any test available to 1948 forensic science. Investigators circulate his photograph and a detailed physical description across the country and beyond, appealing publicly through newspapers for anyone who might recognize him, listing his height, his build, his slightly protruding ears, and his unusually developed calf muscles that suggest a habit of some athletic pursuit. Yet no family member, no friend, no employer, and no landlord ever comes forward to claim him. Weeks pass, then months, and the case grows steadily colder, even as it grows steadily stranger. In January of 1949, staff at the Adelaide railway station discover an unclaimed brown suitcase, quietly sitting in a station locker where it had been deposited on the 30th of November, the day before the body was found. Inside, investigators find clothing with the identifying tags removed in that same careful, deliberate manner, alongside a table knife, cut down and sharpened into a small dagger, a stenciling brush of the kind used by ship's crews for marking cargo, and a distinctive waxed thread of a type used specifically by tailors for repairing coats, but frustratingly, nothing inside reveals an actual name. Nearly 3 months after the initial discovery, in a detail almost missed entirely, a pathologist re-examining the dead man's trousers finds a small pocket sewn cleverly into the waistband, so subtle and so tightly stitched that it had been completely overlooked during the original postmortem. Inside that hidden pocket is a tiny scrap of paper, rolled tight, bearing 2 printed words in an elegant flowing script, Tamam Shid. Investigators quickly determined the phrase is Persian, meaning it is ended or it is finished, and that it was torn cleanly from the final page of a rare, out-of-print edition of a classic collection of poems called the Rubaiyat, a work meditating openly on fate, mortality, and the fleeting nature of life itself. A public appeal for the specific book from which that page came leads a local man forward, who says he found a matching copy of the very same rare edition tossed unceremoniously into the back seat of his unlocked car, parked near that very beach on the night in question, as though someone had climbed in only briefly before changing course entirely. Inside the back cover of that recovered book, investigators find a local telephone number written faintly in pencil, along with 5 short lines of capital letters that appear completely random at first glance, arranged almost like a coded message meant only for someone who already knew how to read it. The telephone number traces back to a young nurse living not far from the beach where the body was found, a woman investigators refer to publicly only by the pseudonym Justin in order to protect her identity and her family from unwanted attention. When shown a plaster cast made of the dead man's face, she reacts, according to the detective present at the time, with visible and unmistakable shock, her composure slipping for just a moment. Yet she firmly and repeatedly denies ever having known him personally, and detectives are left unable to press the matter any further given the thinness of the evidence connecting them. Code experts, university cryptographers, and dedicated amateur enthusiasts spend decades attempting to crack the strange sequence of letters found in the book, running it through every cipher method known at the time, and many devised specifically for this case alone, but no one ever produces a solution that is both linguistically sound and convincing to the wider community of researchers. Some argue the letters aren't a deliberate code at all, but rather the first letters of an entire poem, written from memory in the dark, hurried, and incomplete, explaining why it never quite resolves into readable language no matter how it's approached. Others insist the precision of the spacing and the crossed-out letter partway through prove it must be something more deliberate, a genuine cipher built for a genuine purpose that has simply never been rediscovered. Over the years that follow, theories about the man's true identity and his final hours multiply rapidly and show no sign of slowing down. Some point to the tense early years of the Cold War and suggest he may have been a foreign spy or intelligence operative silenced deliberately before he could deliver whatever information he was carrying, his missing identification and untraceable poison fitting neatly into that narrative. Others believe he was simply a heartbroken man, perhaps connected romantically to the nurse who reacted with such visible shock, who chose an unusual and deeply deliberate exit rather than continue living with whatever pain he was carrying. Still others argue for something far more mundane, a deeply troubled and isolated man who simply wanted to disappear so completely that not even his own death would leave a trace of who he had once been. The case is formally reopened multiple times across the following decades, as new forensic techniques become available and old assumptions are tested again under fresh scrutiny. Yet each renewed effort seems only to deepen the mystery rather than resolve it. In 2021, authorities finally exhumed his remains from the Adelaide cemetery where he had been buried, specifically to extract usable genetic material using techniques that simply didn't exist in 1948, a decision that draws considerable public attention and no small amount of debate about disturbing a grave that had gone untouched for over 70 years. Researchers worked carefully to extract viable DNA from the old remains, a painstaking process given the age and condition of the sample. And by the following year, in 2022, genetic genealogists finally combine that extracted DNA with vast public family tree databases and succeed in identifying him as Carl Webb, an electrical engineer originally from suburban Melbourne, finally giving the long-nameless man an actual name and a documented life after 74 remarkable years of complete anonymity. Records afterwards suggest Webb had been going through a difficult and estranged period in his personal life around the time of his death, separated from his wife and largely out of contact with his surviving family. Details that offer some faint context but still fall well short of a full explanation. Yet even with an identity finally established at long last, the deeper and stranger questions still remain frustratingly unanswered. Why were his clothing tags so carefully and deliberately removed, down to the very last stitch? What did that strange 5-line sequence of letters truly mean? And was it ever meant to be read by anyone at all? And why exactly did he end up on that particular beach, dressed so carefully in a suit and tie, on that particular warm December night, with a torn scrap of poetry hidden in a pocket sewn specifically to conceal it? The little book of poems, the small hidden pocket, and that haunting torn phrase, "It has ended," continue to draw researchers, historians, and amateur investigators back to the case again and again, each hoping to be the one who finally closes the final gap. Documentaries are made. University courses reference the case as a benchmark in the limits of forensic science, and amateur codebreakers around the world still submit new proposed solutions to the letters every single year, none of them yet accepted as definitive by the wider community. To this day, despite a name now finally attached to the man once known only as the Unknown Man of Somerton, no complete and satisfying explanation exists for what truly happened on that quiet Adelaide beach, or for the secret he seems to have carried so carefully into the seawall's shadow and out of the world entirely. If you enjoyed this story, like and subscribe for more real, unexplained mysteries.